My name is Anastasia Rhine and I'm 34 years old. 4 years ago, my father told me I was no longer welcome in his life. He didn't do it gently. He did it after I spent the previous 7 years building my entire existence around being useful to him, the reliable one, the surgeon daughter, the one who always answered the phone at 2 a.m. when things fell apart. And then, the moment he didn't need me anymore, he decided I never mattered at all. But the real fracture didn't happen on that day. It happened 3 months earlier when my sister Monica told my parents that I had faked my acceptance to Johns Hopkins for their residency program. She told them I'd made the whole thing up, that I was lying, that I was a failure who couldn't handle the truth. The lie was so specific, so calculated, that it didn't just damage my relationship with my parents, it demolished the fragile architecture of respect I'd spent my entire life constructing. I was 30 years old when that happened. I had spent a decade in medical school and residency. I had actually been accepted to Johns Hopkins. I had the letter. I had the contract. I had told my family during a phone call after I'd received the acceptance, expecting finally, to see something like pride in my father's voice. Instead, 3 weeks later, my mother called me crying. My father refused to come to the phone. Before we get into this, I need you to understand something. I spent my entire childhood being the invisible one, the daughter who didn't require much, the one who was fine, who was doing okay, who didn't need constant reassurance or attention. My sister Monica was 7 years younger than me, and she was everything I wasn't, bright in the way that demands witnessing, the kind of kid who walked into a room and commanded it. My parents ate that up. They fed on her performance the way I learned to feed on scraps. I was 11 when I realized I would never be the favorite. I remember sitting in the back of our station wagon while my mother gushed about Monica's dance recital. Monica was 4. She had cried through the entire performance because she hated the costume. My mother was describing it like it was a transcendent moment. I had won the science fair that week. The blue ribbon was on the dashboard, and she hadn't mentioned it once. I looked at that ribbon for the entire drive home and made a decision that would shape everything that came after. Fine, I'll be the one who doesn't need anything. I'll be the one who makes things easier. My father was an accountant, meticulous, controlled, someone who moved through the world expecting things to function according to plan. My mother was his opposite, mercurial and emotional, constantly orbiting whatever captured her attention that week. Together, they had created a household where stability was currency and drama was payment. I learned to be the stability. I learned to be the quiet emergency solution that didn't actually look like an emergency. By high school, I was calculating, not in a predatory way, but in a survival way. I knew my mother's moods well enough to predict them. I knew when my father needed space and when he needed someone to sit with him in it. I knew Monica would eventually burn out on whatever she was obsessing over, and I'd be the one holding the flashlight while our parents either celebrated her pivot or mourned her abandonment. I was the steadying hand, the one you could count on. The one who absorbed the impact so others didn't have to. When I told them I was going to medical school, my father actually smiled, the kind of smile that happens once or twice in a lifetime when the formula finally works. I was going to be a surgeon, his word, not mine, though I came to love it. A surgeon was something he could quantify. A surgeon was successful. A surgeon was respectable. And more than that, a surgeon was the kind of achievement that might finally make someone like me matter. Medical school was brutal, but I had trained my entire life for brutality. I scheduled my rotations around my mother's depression spirals. I called home on Thursday nights because that's when my father had the most time to talk. I sent Monica money when she struggled, even when I couldn't afford to. I became the problem solver, the person who picked up the phone at midnight because my parents' air conditioning broke in July and they needed emotional support about the heat. I was the reliable one, the sacrifice maker, the daughter who understood that this was what love meant. The moment that changed everything was so small it almost didn't exist. I was in my final year of surgical residency, pulling 80-hour weeks, living on a protein bar a day, and the Johns Hopkins position opened up. It was prestigious. It was competitive. It was exactly what my father had always wanted for me, even if he'd never said it directly. I applied, I interviewed, I got the letter. I called my parents from a supply closet at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday because I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait 3 days until Thursday to tell them. I was crying, actually crying, which I never did. I said, I got it. I got Johns Hopkins. And my father said, I always knew you would, and something inside me cracked open in the most exquisite way. For 3 weeks, I was the person I'd always been supposed to be. Then my mother called me at work. She was crying, and her crying had a specific quality, the sharp, gasping cry of betrayal. She said, "How could you lie to us? How could you tell us you were accepted when you weren't? Monica told us everything. She said you admitted it to her. She said you've been pretending." I remember the exact color of the surgical light above me when my brain processed those words. Pale yellow, almost white. I remember my hands being unsteady when I hung up, and a nurse asking if I was okay, and me lying and saying yes. I called Monica immediately. I said, "What did you tell them?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said the truth and hung up. The truth was a lie, the genius of it, and I used that word with the kind of disgust you can only feel towards someone who has known you your whole life, was that Monica didn't need my parents to forget me. She needed them to believe I had abandoned them. She needed them to think I was the kind of person who would fake an achievement, who would deceive them, who would be small enough to lie just to feel important. She succeeded. I called my father 14 times in 5 days. The first 4 went to voicemail. By the 5th, his number was blocked. I sent emails to my mother with the acceptance letter attached, documentation from Johns Hopkins, contact information for the program director. I sent a handwritten letter on cardstock, the kind of letter that takes 4 hours to write because you keep destroying it. The letter came back unopened. I tried calling my mother from different numbers, and on the 3rd attempt she answered. And I heard in her voice that she didn't believe me. Not because there was no evidence, but because believing me would require admitting that their golden daughter had destroyed something precious out of spite. Here's what I've learned about family betrayal. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's always rooted in something that came before. Monica had spent her entire life watching me be the reliable one, and she had spent her entire life resenting the invisible weight of that reliability. Because if I was the dependable one, she was the expendable one. And expendable people will burn down a lot to prove they matter. I didn't break. I want to tell you that I dramatically cut them off or had some cathartic moment where I realized I was better off without them. I didn't. What I did was something quieter and more painful. I accepted it. I accepted that I had spent my entire life building a structure in someone else's image, and they had rejected the architect. And I had 2 choices. I could spend my 30s fighting for their belief, or I could build something new. I chose something new. My attending physician was a woman named Dr. Patricia Summers. She was in her 60s, never married, and had the kind of career that existed in a completely different dimension from family drama. When I came to work looking like someone had hollowed me out from the inside, she didn't ask what was wrong. She just started having lunch with me, just appeared beside me during the difficult surgeries. Just never acknowledged the fact that I was drowning while still operating at 95% capacity. One day, 6 months after the lie, she sat with me in her office and said, "They don't deserve to know where you're going. They've already proven they won't look if you tell them. So you're going to build it anyway for you, and eventually some people will notice. And those people, the ones who notice without being told, those are the ones who matter." I didn't cry. I had stopped crying by then, but I breathed differently after that. I completed my residency. I took the Johns Hopkins position. I moved to Baltimore in an apartment that smelled like old tile and possibility. I developed specialties that only the best surgeons develop, not out of ambition, but out of the quiet desperation of someone with something to prove to an audience of one. I published papers. I trained residents. I became the kind of doctor that people requested, that other surgeons trusted their family members with. And I built a chosen family. Dr. Summers became the person I called with good news. I had friends from residency who had also discovered that biological families sometimes choose narratives over people. I had colleagues who became, quite simply, the people who showed up. 4 years after the lie, I got a phone call at 3 a.m. The hospital number I didn't recognize at first, but the name Monica Rhine I recognized immediately. She'd been in a car accident, severe head trauma, multiple surgeries lined up. And the hospital had called my father first because Monica was listed as the priority contact, and my father had called the hospital and said, "You need to get my other daughter, get Anastasia, whatever is happening, you need her." I remember the exact moment I pulled into the hospital parking lot, my hands on the steering wheel completely steady, my heart doing something strange and painful in my chest, the realization hitting me like a physical force. My father had kept my number. All these years, while claiming I didn't exist, he had kept my number. I went through the mechanical process of changing into scrubs, reviewing the case. understanding the extent of her injuries. I walked past the ICU waiting area without looking, because I knew who would be sitting there. I knew my father would be there with his face doing that thing it does when the world is not following the plan. The surgery took 11 hours. I was precise, I was brilliant. I was operating on my sister's brain while some part of me was still 11 years old, watching her become everything I wasn't. But I was a surgeon first, a daughter second, a person with wounded feelings third, and my hands did the work that hands were supposed to do. I completed the sutures on the last closed incision at 5:17 a.m., 63 stitches, perfect closure, the kind of work that other surgeons would study in textbooks someday. I came out of the OR and went directly to the waiting room. My father was standing by the window. My mother was asleep in a chair, and they both turned when they saw me, and I watched the recognition move through my father like something physical, not just recognition of me, but recognition of what I had become while they weren't looking. I was still in my surgical blues. My badge was clipped to my chest, Dr. Anastasia Rhine, Johns Hopkins Chief Surgical Resident. The credentials were impossible to miss. I didn't cry, I didn't hug. I said, "Your daughter is stable, the surgery was successful. She'll be in the ICU for observation for the next 48 hours. She's going to recover." My father's face did something complicated. He said, "Anastasia." I held up a hand. I said, "I'm not here to talk. I'm here to be the surgeon you apparently wanted me to be. The talking comes later if it comes at all." He nodded. He understood that I was holding all the power now, and he was right. The recovery was slow and miraculous in the way that medicine is miraculous when everything goes right. Monica woke up after 3 days. She didn't remember the accident. She didn't remember much of anything at first, and then slowly memory reassembled itself into something functional. I was there for most of it, not as family, but as her doctor. Professional, composed, a woman in scrubs who knew exactly how to talk to her about neurological recovery and rehabilitation protocols. On the 4th day, Monica looked at me with the part of her consciousness that had reassembled itself and said, "You're the surgeon." I said, "I am." She said, "Dad said you were a liar." I said, "I know what he said." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm sorry," and then she cried, and I stood beside her bed and didn't move toward her or away from her. I just stood there, present and unreachable. The shift happened slowly. My mother started coming to my apartment on Sundays and sitting in my kitchen without invitation, and I let her. I didn't forgive her. I just stopped defending against her presence. My father tried multiple times to have a conversation, and I held up the same hand and said, "When you're ready to talk about what happened, we can talk." He wasn't ready for 3 months. When he finally was ready, we sat in a hospital cafe, neutral territory where I could leave if I needed to, and he said, "I should have fought harder to believe you." I said, "Yes, you should have." He said, "I don't know how to fix that." I said, "You don't fix it. You prove it differently from now on. You believe me the first time. You defend me without being asked. You don't accept a version of events because it fits a story. That's what you do differently." He nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. I remember thinking that this was the first moment he'd ever really listened to me, because what I was saying didn't require him to do anything except change. Monica went to therapy. Real therapy, not the kind where you go once and call yourself healed. She worked through her resentment of me in ways that were clinical and honest and occasionally painful. She wrote me a letter that I didn't read for 6 months. When I finally did, it wasn't an apology that required acceptance. It was just the truth of what she'd felt and why she'd done it. That was enough. 8 months after Monica's accident, my parents invited me to dinner. Not to their house, to a restaurant, again, neutral territory. It was Wednesday night, which was Monica's physical therapy night, so she couldn't make it. It was the 4 of us. Me, my mother, my father, and Dr. Patricia Summers, whom I'd asked to come because I needed someone in the room who knew the entire architecture of how I'd built myself in the aftermath. 4 plates, a reservation under my name, nobody trying to perform something we weren't. My father said, "Thank you for being Anastasia Rhine, the surgeon. We're going to work on being worthy of knowing Anastasia Rhine, the daughter." And I said, "That's a start. Here's what I've learned about people who raise you while also failing you. They're always more complex than the story you initially tell yourself. My father wasn't a villain. He was just a man who had trained himself to believe what fit his worldview, and when the truth contradicted that worldview, he chose the lie. But he also kept my number. He also called me back when his daughter needed me. And that contradiction, the fact that he could do both, is the part that makes reconciliation possible. 7 years have passed since the initial betrayal. I'm now the chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins. Monica is finishing her law degree and has started her own practice. My parents come to my apartment every other Sunday, and we eat meals together that are imperfect and real. My mother still sometimes tries to explain the betrayal, and I still hold up the same hand and say, "We're moving forward now." My father and I have never had a conversation about what was lost. I think we both know that 7 years of my life, the years I spent building credibility only to have it dismissed, can't be recovered. But something new has grown in that space, not trust restored but trust rebuilt. Different, stronger, with a foundation that knows how to bend. The lie didn't destroy me. It clarified me. It showed me that the person I had been trying to become for my father was a reflection he never fully appreciated, and that meant I could become something else entirely for myself. I became more clinical, more precise, less interested in being admired and more interested in being excellent. I became someone who chose her family based on consistency rather than obligation. I still think about the night Monica was in surgery, and I remember my hands moving with absolute certainty while my heart was doing something complicated. I remember thinking, this is what happens when you finally become indispensable in a way that can't be questioned. And I realized that wasn't a victory. It was just a different kind of pain, the pain of being needed when you've decided you're worth more than need. If you're waiting for your family to see you, really see you, not perform seeing you, I'm here to tell you something that took me 7 years to learn. You don't have to wait. You can build yourself in the mirror in the surgery in the quiet moments where nobody is watching. And when they finally look, they'll see someone they don't recognize because you're not the person they left. You're the person you became in their absence. And that's the most powerful thing a daughter can do. My father taught me that you can love someone and still hold them accountable. My sister taught me that people who hurt you are often hurting themselves first. My mentor taught me that chosen family sometimes matters more than biological family. And I taught myself that I am worth more than the narrative someone else tries to write about me. 4 plates, it's a start. And sometimes after 7 years, a start is everything.